Do you know what hurts more than losing something you own? It's realizing that betrayal can come from your own family. It wasn't a stranger who hurt me. It was my own children. They sold my dream car, the symbol of all my hard work, just to please their arrogant stepfather who always treated me like I didn't exist. That sale wasn't just a transaction. It was a cruel message. You don't matter anymore. But there was something they didn't know. While I endured the humiliation in silence, I carried a truth I'd kept hidden for years. I didn't need to raise my voice or beg for respect. I simply waited, because I knew that when justice arrives, it doesn't knock. It comes in, weighs heavy, and changes everything. And that's what I want to show you, how patience can become the greatest revenge, and how a single document turned my pain into freedom. Do you want to know how I got my Cadillac back and made them pay every last cent for their betrayal? Since I was young, I learned that some victories aren't measured by money or diplomas hanging on a wall. For me, that 1968 Cadillac meant more than steel and wheels. It was a symbol of dignity, respect, and resilience. Every chrome detail carried the memory of sleepless nights I worked, the times I swallowed humiliation at my job, and the promise I made to myself that one day I'd smile behind the wheel of my dream car. It's strange how objects can carry pieces of our soul. That car wasn't just mine. It was part of the family, like a wedding photo or a grandfather's heirloom. The Cadillac held stories. Anyone who sat on those leather seats knows. It felt like every stitch told the story of my own liberation from a hard life of sacrifice and small victories against fate. People often don't understand that kind of bond. They say, it's just a car, but is it really? A book is just paper and ink too, and yet it can change entire generations. That Cadillac taught me more about patience and perseverance than any classroom lecture ever did. Because when you restore a car, you're also restoring your faith in what once seemed lost. When I polished its body, it wasn't vanity, it was self-respect. After all, how many of us have had something or someone that helped us lift our heads after betrayal or an unexpected fall? That car was my silent ally, reminding me that dignity is built in small acts of care. I still remember the first time I sat behind the wheel. My hands shook with emotion. It felt like I wasn't holding a steering wheel, but the reins of my own life. In that moment, every humiliation I had endured seemed far away. It was as if the roar of the engine whispered, "You've won." And that victory wasn't against others. It was against the doubt that haunted me for years. Funny thing is, the Cadillac even taught my kids lessons. Michael and Olivia grew up listening to me tell stories about every part I replaced, every detail I restored. Maybe they thought it was repetitive, but those stories carried a lesson. True. Value isn't in what you buy, ready-made. It's in what you build with patience and effort. A car can teach you more about family than most psychology books. I've always said respect isn't demanded, it's earned. When I drove that car down the street, it wasn't the machine that turned heads. It was what it represented. Years of honest work. People didn't just see an old man in a classic. They saw someone who turned pain into freedom. The Cadillac was living proof that the sweetest revenge against life's hardships is perseverance. There were days I thought about giving up. Who hasn't? My paycheck barely fed the family, and bills piled up before I even opened my pay envelope. But one look at that Cadillac, even in pieces, reminded me that big victories take time. That patience, which many called stubbornness, gave me the strength to hold on to my dignity. I often compared that car to a tree you plant when you're young. At first, it's just a fragile branch. But over the years, it grows, gives shade, bears fruit. The Cadillac was my tree. Every ride in it felt like resting under the shade of a well-nourished life, even in the middle of storms of betrayal, pain, and family strife. At neighborhood events, when I parked the car, I noticed the looks of admiration. But it wasn't empty pride I felt. It was emotion, because I knew where I had come from. And that feeling is irreplaceable. To look at something you built with sweat and know it carries your tears and your hopes too. Friends often asked me why I didn't sell the Cadillac. After all, it could have brought in a good amount of money. But they didn't understand. Some things are priceless. You can put a price on gold, land, or houses, but not on memory or dignity. Selling that car would have been like selling a piece of my soul, and no check in the world could pay for that. The Cadillac was also my silent confessional. How many times did I park it, turn off the engine, and just sit there pouring my heart out to the wheel? Every betrayal I endured, every humiliation I swallowed, I turned into strength when I sat inside. Maybe that's why it became as essential to me as the roof over my head. On one special occasion, I drove Olivia to her prom in that Cadillac. I remember the sparkle in her eyes as she stepped out of the car, like she had just arrived in a fairy tale carriage. In that moment, I realized the car wasn't just my dream, it was part of the education I gave them, to show that even in hard times, it's possible to build something remarkable. Over time, the Cadillac stopped being just a possession. It became a symbol of freedom from every limitation life tried to put on me. Whenever someone said I wasn't capable, I looked at that car and thought, I've proved them wrong before. I can prove them wrong again. It was my constant reminder that the sweetest revenge against doubt is to keep moving forward. And that's exactly why I never imagined my own children would turn it into a source of pain. Because when you give so much love to something, you believe everyone around you will respect it. But life, with its cruel irony, sometimes puts betrayal right where you least expect it. And that's when my story took a turn I never saw coming. It was an ordinary afternoon when the silence in the garage gave me my first warning. I walked in with the keys in my hand, ready to start the Cadillac, but all I found was emptiness, a void that hurt more than any word of humiliation ever spoken to me. The space that once shined with the car's presence was now just a cold echo. My heart raced, and it felt like a piece of me had been ripped out. When I called Michael and Olivia, I thought it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the car was in the shop. Maybe someone in the family had needed it in an emergency. But their faces told another story. Michael avoided my eyes, and Olivia crossed her arms with a look that mixed impatience with coldness. And that's when I realized the betrayal had come from inside my own home. It was Olivia who dropped the news, almost as casually as if she were talking about the weather. Dad, we sold the Cadillac. The words hit me like a stone thrown without mercy. My first reaction was disbelief. We sold it? That car wasn't just a possession. It was part of my life, part of our story. And the worst part was still to come. When they mentioned who the buyer was, they said Daniel, the arrogant stepfather who always stuck his nose where it didn't belong, had been the lucky one. He'll appreciate it more, Michael added, as if that could justify it. In that moment, what I felt wasn't just anger, but a deep sense of disrespect, because they hadn't just handed over the car, they had handed over my dignity. I tried to take a deep breath, but every word they spoke cut like another knife. You don't need that car anymore, Dad. That phrase still echoes in my mind. Who decides what I need or don't need? When someone robs us of the right to choose, what's left behind is the wound of humiliation. It's not about the object. It's about the lack of respect for the history I built. Right then, I remembered how many families are torn apart by reckless decisions, an inheritance divided without discussion, a business sold without consulting the ones who built it. Betrayal, in those cases, doesn't come from the act itself, but from the absence of consideration. That's where family ties begin to crumble. Because without respect, trust slips through your fingers like sand. I tried, calmly, to explain how much that Cadillac meant to me, but they wouldn't listen. Olivia kept insisting Daniel would make better use of the car. It was as if I had become a stranger in my own home. Anyone who has felt that knows, it's not just pain. It's a forced kind of exile, as if they were pushing me out of the very life I helped build. At that moment, I saw the abyss that had opened between us, and a lesson I had learned long ago came to mind. When someone disrespects your effort, you have, two choices. Swallow the humiliation in silence, or find a way to turn pain into a quiet revenge. The first choice may seem easier, but the second, though harder, is the one that restores dignity. I remembered a coworker once sold a motorcycle he'd inherited from his father without asking his siblings. The result was a feud that dragged on for years and shattered bonds that once seemed unbreakable. What my children had done was of the same nature, a gesture that could leave permanent scars on our family if I allowed it. But I decided my story would be different. Their coldness revealed something bigger. The education I thought I had instilled hadn't taken root as I hoped. Because respect isn't just saying please or thank you. It's understanding that some things carry symbolic weight. And when someone doesn't recognize that, they open the door to betrayal. The car was only the tip of the iceberg of something that needed to come to light. I could have yelled, could have exploded, but I chose silence. Not because I was defeated, but because I understood that sometimes the most effective revenge begins there, in the calm look of someone who seems to accept. While they spoke, I was already building a plan inside. And plans like that require patience, composure, and the certainty that every move will carry weight. It's strange how life teaches us in moments of loss. The absence of that car showed me I hadn't only lost a possession, I had lost my children's respect. And when respect is gone, the only way to regain freedom is to prove that dignity is not negotiable. That's the lesson life demands, and it spares no one who ignores it. In that room, standing before them, I noticed something striking. The more they tried to justify themselves, the more they revealed the distance they had put between us. It was as if selling the car was just a reflection of lessons never learned, of values forgotten, and I knew that sooner or later, life itself would deliver the lesson they refused to accept. But deep down, in the middle of the shock, a strange calm was born inside me, because I realized revenge didn't have to be immediate. There was something far more powerful than reacting in the heat of pain, waiting for the right moment. Life always provides a chance to turn the tables, and in my hands I carried memories and documents that would soon make all the difference. As they walked away, leaving me alone with the emptiness in the garage, I knew the story wasn't over. The wound of betrayal cuts deep, but it also awakens hidden strength. And that night, staring at the empty space, I felt destiny was preparing a bigger stage, a stage where humiliation would give way to a reversal no one saw coming. I walked into the living room with steady steps, though inside me, emotions swirled like a storm. My eyes searched for answers in my children's faces, but all I found was icy indifference. The betrayal still burned inside me, and silence became my first weapon. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than the fiercest speech. Olivia was the first to speak again, almost as if she were tired of repeating herself. "Dad, we already explained. You don't need that car anymore." Those words cut deep, like a humiliation that echoed far beyond the empty garage. Michael, standing beside her, just nodded, unable to meet my eyes. It was like watching my own values slip through my fingers all at once. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the heart that pounded like it might burst. "I don't need it," I thought to myself, swallowing hard at every careless word. How many times in life had I been told that I didn't need to dream, didn't need to achieve, didn't need to stand my ground? But dignity isn't measured by necessity, it's measured by the respect you're given. As they spoke with cold indifference, I noticed Daniel sitting there with that smug air of superiority that had always rubbed me wrong. He didn't need to say a word. His mocking smile was enough to turn the whole room into a stage of humiliation. Anyone who's been there knows, it's not what they say, it's what they imply, and that can sting even more than a direct insult. I could have exploded, could have shouted at the top of my lungs, but instead, I chose calm, like someone looking down from a mountaintop. I counted to 10, just like I'd learned as a young man when anger threatened to consume me. And in that self-control, I found an almost divine strength, as if life had been training me for that exact moment. True revenge doesn't begin with impulse. It begins when you hold back, saving your energy for the right strike. As I watched my children trying to justify themselves, I remembered all the times I had taught them the importance of respect. It wasn't about blind obedience. It was about understanding deeper values. Never treat anyone like they're invisible, I used to say firmly. And yet, there I was, being treated as if I didn't matter at all. The betrayal wasn't in the sale itself. It was in the contempt they showed with every word. "Daniel will appreciate the Cadillac more," Olivia repeated, without a shred of guilt in her eyes. The phrase echoed through the room like a hammer striking cold iron, merciless, sharp, final. It would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic, to see that arrogant man praised for something he had never built. That distortion of values is exactly what destroys families and leaves wounds that time struggles to heal. In that moment, I realized there was no point in arguing. When someone refuses to listen, every lesson in respect shatters against the walls of pride. It's like throwing words into the wind and expecting the wind to bring answers back. So I chose silence, not out of defeat, but as part of a long-term strategy. Calm is often mistaken for weakness, but in truth, it's the greatest display of strength. My silence unsettled the room. Olivia fidgeted with her hair nervously. Michael bounced his foot against the floor, and even Daniel shifted under the weight of my steady gaze. Funny how the absence of words can turn into a mirror, forcing people to confront what they carry inside. Anyone who has ever argued with someone who simply watches knows the weight eventually falls back on you. But inside, I wasn't just reflecting. I was remembering the safe in my bedroom, where a leather folder had been resting for decades, full of long-forgotten documents, papers that could turn the game completely against them. And in that instant, I felt something shift within me. Humiliation was beginning to turn into fuel for revenge. I spoke little that night, but every word carried hidden intent. I only said, "You think you understand value, but maybe you don't know the real price." I left it at that, hanging in the air like heavy storm clouds. I saw Daniel's eyes narrow, and a suffocating silence fell over the room. None of them imagined that behind my calm stare, a solid plan was already taking shape. Life has a way of stripping masks away, sooner or later. Michael and Olivia tried to appear confident in their decision, but their bodies betrayed them. Restless, uneasy, Daniel strutted around like a winner, but his arrogance was nothing more than a prelude to his inevitable fall. What looked like the end of a story was, in truth, the beginning of a powerful, silent liberation. As they left the room, I studied every gesture, every expression, like recording a movie to play back later. Because revenge isn't built only with documents and evidence. It's also built by carefully reading people. Those who understand human behavior win battles without speaking a word. And it hurt me deeply to realize just how far my children had strayed from the very essence of family. I didn't go to bed early that night as I usually did. Instead, I sat in the armchair, remembering all the humiliations I had endured at work, all the times I had considered giving up. Each past defeat had become an invisible brick in the wall of my patience. And now, that patience would no longer be used to swallow betrayal, but to architect the restoration of my dignity. When I finally rose from that chair, I knew exactly what I would do. The silence I had held onto in that room wasn't surrender. It was the signal of an approaching shift. Because hidden in my bedroom, inside that forgotten leather folder, was the key to turning pain into justice. And soon, they would learn the true cost of selling what was never theirs to give away. At the next dinner, the table felt more like a courtroom than a family gathering. The smell of food couldn't mask the heavy air. Daniel walked in with long strides and a smile of someone who thought he had already won. And to crown his arrogance, he arrived driving my Cadillac, parking it proudly in front of the house like a stolen trophy. All eyes turned to me, waiting for a reaction, an outburst, a scream, a collapse. But I remained silent, watching the scene like an audience to a poorly staged play. Daniel held up the keys, dangling them like a prize. The humiliation coursed through me like poison, but I didn't let it show on my face. Life has a way of testing us right where it hurts the most. Seeing that car, my history, my pride, used to ridicule me felt like watching every accomplishment stomped underfoot. But I knew I couldn't respond then. Respect is never begged for. It is reclaimed at the right moment, in a way that no one dares question your dignity again. Daniel's voice filled the room, loud, mocking, making cheap jokes as he stared at me with open challenge. This car needed someone who could really take care of it, he boasted, earning forced laughter from a few at the table. Every word hit like a punch, and for a moment I thought about walking out, but I stayed seated, because sometimes vengeance begins with silence. My children avoided my eyes, visibly ashamed. Maybe, deep down, they already understood the weight of what they had done, but they didn't dare confront Daniel. Whether out of fear or convenience, I couldn't tell. That's the true cost of betrayal. It isn't only the act itself, but also the silence of those who watch and do nothing. I recalled a story a friend once told me about his family being torn apart over land. The oldest brother humiliated the youngest in front of everyone, believing he would never be challenged. But years later, a single forgotten contract hidden in a drawer changed everything. That night, at the dinner table, I saw my own life reflected in that story. As I chewed my food slowly, my mind wasn't on the meal, but on every detail of the humiliation I endured. Swallowing that dinner felt like swallowing the contempt they wanted to impose on me. But unlike someone broken, I was turning every bite into fuel for the plan forming inside me. It wasn't just pain, it was also freedom. Strangely, even in the middle of that shame, I felt an unusual calm. It was as if my soul whispered, "Wait, watch, prepare." Because dignity lost is not restored with rushed words, but with undeniable proof. And I had in my possession something none of them imagined. Documents preserved for years, forgotten by everyone, except me. Daniel never realized it, but every move he made only tightened his own noose. Excess arrogance is a weight that eventually drags its carrier down. He flaunted the Cadillac like a stolen crown, never realizing stolen crowns never shine forever. And that's when I knew the humiliation he forced upon me was actually the beginning of his downfall. My children probably believed I wouldn't fight back. They thought age meant weakness, that silence meant surrender. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Silence is the sharpest weapon of someone who has lived long enough to understand life's games. I didn't need to prove anything at that dinner, because life had already taught me how to wait for the perfect moment. With every smug smile Daniel flashed, I remembered the safe in my room. Inside, the leather folder still waited, the very one that could change the course of this story. And while he gloated, I was already looking beyond the scene. Because anyone holding a hidden ace doesn't fear the present. They only wait for the chance to flip the table in front of everyone. The weight of that humiliation didn't crush me, On the contrary, it made me stronger. Like iron that becomes tougher the more it's hammered, every word of scorn forged my determination. And I knew it wouldn't be long before they understood the true price of betrayal and disrespect. Funny how no one noticed my faint smile when Daniel raised his glass, toasting to the new owner of the Cadillac. He thought he had won, but only the one who carries the truth in his pocket knows who's really in control. My silence wasn't resignation. It was the sign that something far greater was about to happen. I let the night pass without hurry. I listened to every comment, every jab, every attempt to make me feel small. But deep down, it no longer hurt as much, because I knew the secret I carried. That leather folder wasn't just a collection of old papers. It was the key to turning a night of humiliation into a future of justice. When everyone went to bed, I walked calmly to my room. I opened the safe carefully, as though opening a door to the past, and there it was, untouched. The leather folder that had waited patiently for the right moment. The moment my hands touched it, humiliation began to transform into strength. Inside, a forgotten clause was waiting for me. That night, when the house was silent, I stepped into my room carrying a secret greater than my pain. The silence itself seemed to conspire with what I was about to do. I ran my hand over the cold key, drew a deep breath, and turned the lock. It felt like I wasn't just opening a safe, but a door to my own liberation. There it lay, among a few keepsakes, the leather folder I had protected for decades. The worn leather bore the marks of time, but still held the weight of something priceless. Like a silent guardian, it had waited for this exact moment. As I touched it, a wave of emotion coursed through me. It felt as if my lost dignity was awakening. The folder carried more than documents. It carried the story of my life, contracts, purchase records, papers most would call just bureaucracy. But I knew, inside lay proof that the Cadillac could never have been sold without my consent. Holding those papers was like gripping a sword of justice made of ink and signatures. As I flipped through, I remembered how often my children mocked me as old-fashioned for keeping everything. They never understood that preservation is part of education, preserving papers, memories, stories. Freedom often hides in what others dismiss as useless. That night I realized every signature I had kept had the power to turn the tables. I handled the papers carefully, like relics, dates, faded stamps, but the truth was still alive on the page. With every sheet, humiliation was replaced with hope, because there's no revenge stronger than the kind built on undeniable proof. And that folder was my secret arsenal. It's strange how tiny details can change entire destinies. Many dismiss a clause, a line, in small print. But I always believed dignity is in the details too. Just as families can be destroyed by a careless word, injustice can be undone by a forgotten phrase in a contract. As I read, my heart pounded, like it was the first time I had ever seen those words. It was like finding gold in your own backyard after years of never digging. The treasure wasn't the metal. It was the certainty that my story wouldn't be erased. That folder reminded me, betrayal is never final when truth is on your side. I realized I didn't need to rush. The document had always been with me, and it would remain until the right moment came. I didn't need to shout or slam my fist on the table. I held in my hands something louder than any argument, legal proof, stamped justice. The guarantee that the sale my children had made meant nothing. I remembered something my father once told me. Son, papers carry more than ink. They carry the future. In my youth, I thought it was an exaggeration. But that night I understood. Because inside that folder wasn't just paperwork. It was the chance to show my children that dignity cannot be sold. Their betrayal would come with a price. I sat on the edge of the bed with the folder beside me and reflected. How many people have been ruined because they didn't keep their documents? How many fathers deceived because they trusted too much? Yes, I had been betrayed, but I was prepared. And maybe that's the greatest lesson a father can leave. Always be ready, even in the face of pain. With every page I read, it felt like I was speaking with my younger self, the man who once signed those contracts, already anticipating the future. It was as though he had left me a gift, a silent weapon against arrogance yet to come. And that night, that gift was about to fulfill its purpose. The hours passed, but I felt no fatigue. The weight of humiliation had been replaced by a new energy, because it's not time that strengthens us. It's the clarity of knowing we hold in our hands the chance to undo injustice. And that leather folder was my quiet ally. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured the scene. Daniel, once so smug, collapsing under the weight of a single document. Michael and Olivia, pale, realizing respect is never begged for, it's earned. That vision gave me strength. Because revenge born from justice is more than revenge. It's a lesson for those who still need to learn. Carefully, I organized the papers again and locked them away, but this time with the certainty that soon they would be put to use. I touched the leather like sealing a pact with fate. It wasn't just about reclaiming a car, it was about restoring my dignity and the respect my children tried to strip away. And the folder, silent as ever, seemed to promise exactly that. That night, as I shut the safe, something inside me shut as well. The pain no longer weighed me down. It had become purpose. Because once you realize you hold the key to reversing humiliation, fear disappears. And in that instant, I knew. Inside that folder was more than ink and paper. There was a forgotten clause that could change everything. As I reread the papers with care, my eyes stopped at a nearly invisible line. A clause, written in tiny print that most would have overlooked. But there it was. The car could not be sold without my signature. It felt like finding treasure buried in my own backyard. That tiny detail became the spark of my revenge. I felt a mix of relief and triumph, as if humiliation had finally met its counterweight. That clause gave me back something greater than the Cadillac. It gave me back the respect they had tried to steal. Because betrayal may wound, but justice has the power to set you free. And in that moment I understood. Dignity often hides in the fine print no one bothers to read. It's strange how many people dismiss the details. I've heard it countless times. You don't need to read everything, just sign. But that's exactly where life plays its tricks. That signature from years ago had now become my shield against disrespect. And I learned that, just like in family relationships, what seems small can carry the power to change entire destinies. As I flipped through the contract, I remembered all the times I was criticized for keeping so many papers. They called me old-fashioned, stuck in the past. But the truth is, the way I was raised taught me to value records, because memory is defense, proof, and legacy. And that night, I saw how my stubbornness had turned into a weapon, ready to crush Daniel's arrogance. With each line I read, it felt like it wasn't just me speaking, but the past itself crying out inside me. The man who once signed that contract knew life was unpredictable. Maybe without realizing it, I had prepared for this exact moment. It was as if the future had sent me a message. Keep this. You'll need it one day. The clause was crystal clear, leaving no room for interpretation. No sale could be valid without my approval. That made the entire performance staged by my children and Daniel nothing but a farce. It was like a wall of paper rising against injustice. Anyone who has suffered betrayal knows the power of discovering that there's still a way out, and I held that key in my hands. I pictured Daniel's face when the clause was read aloud in front of a judge. His confidence would crumble like a sandcastle against the tide. I thought of Michael and Olivia too, believing they had been clever, yet now they would be forced to face the truth. Life has its ironies. Sometimes the greatest lessons come in a single forgotten line at the bottom of a page. What struck me most was the calm that returned to me. Before, all I felt was anger and pain. Now I had purpose. Revenge was no longer just a desire. It was a clear, legitimate path. That change of perspective is what separates defeat from victory. It isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who presents the right proof at the right time. As I reflected on the discovery, I thought about how many people ignore the details in their own lives. Just like in a contract, family relationships also have unwritten clauses: respect, loyalty, gratitude. When someone violates those invisible rules, betrayal is born. And that's exactly what my children had done. They had broken the clause of respect, but what they didn't know was that I had kept more than papers. I had kept courage, because proof means nothing if you don't have the determination to use it. And that night, I made my decision. I wouldn't just take back my car. I would make them an example. The lesson they had ignored would come back to them, delivered harshly through the justice they had underestimated. I closed the contract for a moment and stared at the folder. Strange how something so simple could hold so much power. I realized then, just as a document can turn into a lawsuit, a single gesture can turn into a war. Life constantly reminds us to be prepared, and I was. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty street. The Cadillac wasn't there, but in my mind, it was already home, because that forgotten clause had already brought it back to me. The only question was when. Justice has its rhythm, But when truth is clear, it never fails, and I was ready to wait. At that moment, I knew I needed support. Knowing about the clause wasn't enough. I had to act properly. That's when I decided I would take the documents to my lawyer, because revenge, to be complete, has to be legal, clean, and undeniable. The folder wasn't just memory. It was ammunition for a battle already scheduled. I closed my eyes and silently thanked my younger self. If not for his discipline, I might have been empty-handed, surrendered to humiliation. But here I was, holding the most powerful weapon, truth on paper, and the certainty that soon, Daniel, Michael, and Olivia would face the weight of that discovery. With the leather folder firmly in my hands, I realized the battle was only beginning. The forgotten clause had become my greatest ally, and the very next day, I would take the next step, placing those papers in my lawyer's hands to officially confirm what I already knew in my heart. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, but my mind was already racing. I drank my coffee in silence, its bitterness mixing with the anticipation of what lay ahead. I picked up the leather folder carefully, as though holding treasure, not just paper, but dignity. Walking through the streets toward my lawyer's office, each step felt steadier than the last. It was as if the weight of betrayal had turned into fuel for justice. People hurried past, some greeting me politely, unaware of the storm inside me. And I thought, how many of us carry invisible battles the world will never see? When I arrived, I was welcomed with the usual courtesy, but this time my gaze held another intensity. I handed my lawyer the folder and asked him to examine every page carefully. As he read, my heart pounded, each second dragging like an eternity. That office had become a courtroom of my hopes. He adjusted his glasses, raised his eyebrows, and looked at me with gravity. Edward, the car could not have been sold without your signature. Legally, the transaction is invalid. Those words sounded like music to my ears. It was confirmation that not only was I right, but I now held the ultimate weapon against humiliation. A wave of emotion washed over me, hard to put into words, like years of patience had finally found their purpose. It reminded me of stories where, after years of injustice, someone found redemption in a single, overlooked detail. The contract was that detail, and I realized then, in life, revenge doesn't come from brute force, but from the wisdom of keeping proof. We discussed the next steps, and he laid them out clearly. The sale would be annulled, and Daniel would be forced to return the car. But more than that, my children would be held accountable for the consequences of their actions. It was about more than reclaiming a possession. It was about restoring my place of respect within my own family. As I listened, I thought of how many fathers had felt as I did, betrayed by their children, powerless to act. The difference was, I had something solid in my hands, and that something was the thin line dividing defeat from liberation. Because dignity is never begged for, it's demanded with proof and determination. That leather folder had become the very symbol of that truth. Then my lawyer said something that stayed with me. Edward, sometimes you need to teach firmly, not to get revenge, but to prevent it from happening again. And in that moment, I realized this was no longer just about the Cadillac. It was about education, about showing Michael and Olivia that choices have consequences. Life teaches, but when it fails, justice steps in. I left the lawyer's office lighter, but also more resolute. The wind on my face felt different, as if it carried the promise of a new era. I pressed the folder against my chest, knowing it wasn't just leather and paper. It was the embodiment of my silent strength. And I promised myself I wouldn't rest until justice was done, publicly and undeniably. I remember teaching Michael how to ride a bike. He fell many times before he understood balance. Now it was life that would make him fall, not with scraped knees, but under the weight of responsibility. And I knew this was a lesson he would never forget. As I walked back home, I saw children playing in the street and thought about their innocence. None of them could imagine that one day they might face betrayal within their own family. But that's life, a field where we learn through laughter and through tears, and I was ready to turn my tears of pain into fuel for a reversal. At home, I sat once more in the living room armchair, staring at the empty garage. But this time, the emptiness didn't bring sadness. It only gave me certainty that soon the Cadillac would be back in its place, and more than that, my dignity would return with it, intact and untouchable, as it should have always been. I reflected on the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is born out of impulse, But justice is born out of strategy, and I was walking the path of justice, because by acting within the law, my victory would not only be personal, but moral, and nothing teaches more than morality, backed by consequence. That night, before bed, I reread every detail my lawyer had explained. It wasn't anxiety, it was preparation. Like a general before battle, I wanted to know every weapon at my disposal, because I knew that soon, my silent war would have its stage, the courtroom, and there, before everyone, the truth would be revealed. I closed my eyes with a new kind of serenity. I was no longer the humiliated man at dinner, nor the betrayed father in front of an empty garage. I was someone carrying truth as my shield and justice as my sword. And soon my children and Daniel would receive the unexpected summons that would change the course of this story forever. A few days after my visit to the lawyer, the silence of my house was broken by the sharp knock of the mailman at the gate. I knew what it was before opening the envelope. Official court notices summoning Michael, Olivia, and Daniel. Holding those papers, I felt a mix of emotion and calm. There were no shouts, no arguments, only the cold voice of justice calling them to account. As I looked at the opened envelope on the table, I couldn't help but reflect on life's irony. Just days ago, I was the man ridiculed in front of everyone, humiliated as my Cadillac was paraded like a trophy. Now it was their turn to receive the unwelcome invitation to stand before a judge. Betrayal had turned into a burden, and each of them would have to carry it. At first, I thought Michael and Olivia would react with regret, but youth mixed with arrogance often blinds. They treated the summons like a bad joke. "Dad, you're overreacting," Olivia said with a nervous laugh. Michael muttered, "This won't amount to anything." Little did they know my evidence was ironclad. This wasn't a bluff. Daniel, on the other hand, was far too confident. He even showed up at my door, wearing that smug smile, saying, "Lawyers know how to buy time, not win battles." I just listened in silence, offering no resistance, because I knew his words would soon lose all meaning. Arrogance is a house built on sand. Sooner or later, the weight brings it all crashing down. That same day, I recalled a lesson I've always carried with me. Those who refuse to respect dialogue must learn through consequences. It's, like raising small children. You can say, "Don't touch the fire" 1,000 times, but if they insist, eventually the burn teaches what words couldn't. Michael and Olivia were about to feel the burn life reserves for those who disregard their own father's dignity. What surprised me most was how quickly the news spread among relatives and neighbors. Whispers began. "Did you hear Edward is suing his own kids?" Some judged me, others supported me, but I didn't care, because this wasn't just about me. It was about proving that respect isn't optional, not even within a family. Justice is part of family too, however painful that may be. I remember sitting in the armchair that night, reflecting on what was to come. I didn't desire to destroy my children, but I needed to teach them, because betrayal without consequence only repeats itself, and I couldn't let them grow up believing dignity could be sold like any other object. Deep down, I knew the courtroom would be more than a place of judgment. It would be a mirror where each of them would see their own mistakes reflected back. Michael would see the weight of his complicity, Olivia would confront the gravity of her coldness, and Daniel would feel the fragility of his arrogance. And I would be there, not to shout, but simply to present the document that carried the truth. That night as I went to bed, an unexpected peace settled over me. It felt as though life was finally putting every piece in its place. There was no anger left, only certainty that justice was coming. I drifted to sleep with a faint smile, imagining the moment they walked into the courtroom laughing nervously, only to fall silent before the forgotten clause in my hands. The day of the hearing arrived like any ordinary morning, but inside me it felt historic. I walked into the courtroom with steady steps, carrying the leather folder as if it were a sword. Around me, Michael and Olivia whispered nervously, trying to laugh off their tension. Daniel still wore his air of superiority, but I carried the calm of someone who already knew the ending. When the judge called for silence, the entire atmosphere shifted. The gavel's echo filled the room with a gravity my children still tried to deny. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, painting the sale as legitimate. His words were long, practiced, and confident, but I knew a single detail would tear apart the entire performance. Then came my turn. I stood slowly, opened the folder, and placed the documents on the table. "Your Honor," my lawyer said, "according to the contract, no sale could be executed without the original owner's signature." The judge adjusted his glasses, read carefully, and in seconds, Daniel's mask began to crack. Olivia and Michael, who had been smirking moments earlier, turned pale. The judge was blunt. The transaction is invalid. The vehicle remains the property of Mr. Edward. The sentence sounded simple, but its impact was devastating. Daniel clenched his fists, unable to accept it. Michael and Olivia lowered their heads, finally realizing the weight of their betrayal. And then came the decision they least expected. They would be held responsible for all the costs of the illegal sale. In that moment, I felt a mix of emotion and liberation. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explode. All it took was showing the truth written on paper. My revenge wasn't just about reclaiming the car. It was about proving that dignity can't be sold and it can't be stolen. As I returned to my seat, I saw silence fall over everyone. And I realized the courtroom hadn't just given me back my Cadillac, it had restored the respect that had been taken from me. Coming home that day felt different. When I opened the gate, I saw the empty garage once again, but this time it didn't hurt. I knew it was only a matter of time before the Cadillac returned to its rightful place, shining as it always should have. I ran my hand over the space where it once stood, and I could almost hear the engine's roar echoing through the neighborhood again. A few days later, there it was, gleaming, returned by court order. I touched the body with the emotion of someone reunited with an old friend. But the greatest moment was still ahead. Michael and Olivia, with their heads down, came to my house with a check to cover all the costs of the illegal sale. The weight of responsibility had finally fallen on them. I watched in silence as they signed the document. The pen seemed heavier than ever in their hands. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was the materialization of the lesson life was forcing on them. The same children who once thought they could humiliate me were now forced to pay every last cent for underestimating my dignity. Daniel didn't show up. Cowardice always finds a way to hide when the truth comes to light, but his absence didn't matter. What mattered was seeing my children face their own choices. Betrayal had a price, and now they were paying it, not only with money, but with the realization that respect is never up for negotiation. As I placed the papers back into the leather folder, I felt a new kind of serenity. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about freedom. The Cadillac was back, yes, but more importantly, so was my dignity. And I realized that sometimes you have to walk through the pain of humiliation to teach the true value of the word respect. Now let me ask you something. How many times have you swallowed the words of someone in your own family who should have respected you, but chose instead to humiliate you? How many times have you stayed silent because you believed you had no strength to fight back? The truth is hard. When we accept betrayal in silence, we give permission for it to happen again. But I want to remind you of something powerful. Inside you, there is a hidden clause, something no one can ever take from you, your dignity. Maybe you've forgotten it in the middle of your pain, but it's still there, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And when you choose to use it, no humiliation can stand. So I'll challenge you. What was your Cadillac? What was the respect they tried to sell cheap? Write it in the comments, because your voice deserves to be heard, and maybe someone going through the same pain will find strength in your story. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because here, every story is a living reminder that the sweetest revenge isn't shouting, but turning pain into freedom. And I'll be with you in every video, proving that respect isn't begged for, it's earned.